It's not going so well for him so far.
Yeah, it's been a rough start for the Prime Minister. First, you had Jacob Rees-Mogg suggesting that the victims and survivors of the Grenfell Tower fire, the horrific fire a few years ago that resulted in so many deaths, were somehow responsible. Then you have, I think, the first ministerial resignation during a campaign since 1974, which also complicates the Conservatives' attempt to win seats in Wales. This was a Welsh secretary who resigned. So it has been a rough start. That said, Johnson is ahead of the polls, and he's really trying to now shift the focus onto Parliament, which he blames for failing to allow Brexit to be delivered, and onto opposition leader Jeremy Corbyn, whom he likened to Stalin in an op-ed piece, in which he said that Corbyn's disdain for the private sector and wealth creation was similar to the Soviet dictators.
So last time we had a general election called by Theresa May, it didn't go so well for her, but it's thought generally, as I understand it, that Boris Johnson is much more charismatic. Do they have high hopes for his party going into these elections?
Yeah, I think it's such a different scenario on all fronts from 2017. Then you had a prime minister who was, by all accounts, a fairly wooden campaigner. She called an election that she didn't really have to call. She was up against an opposition leader who proved to be quite adept on the campaign trail, but he wasn't very well known. So while Jeremy Corbyn, I'd say, outperformed expectations, Theresa May at the time underperformed expectations, and this is just a very different situation. We now have quite a charismatic, campaign-driven prime minister, a gridlocked parliament, a public that's pretty tired of the Brexit negotiations and quite familiar with Jeremy Corbyn now. So I don't think it's that similar to 2017. That said, we may get a lot of tactical voting. There's already talk about how that might play out. So even though the Conservatives are ahead in the polls quite substantially, I wouldn't say this is predictable by any means.
Yeah, and whatever you might call Boris Johnson, you wouldn't call him wooden. That's the one sure thing we know for sure.